My mom and dad abandoned me because my golden brother's fiancée spread lies about me. Now, when they finally learn the truth, they're devastated and want to reconnect. But I'm waiting for them to get on their knees. Hey everyone! This story is going to mess with your head. I'm talking about the kind of betrayal that makes you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. This happened about 8 years ago, but I'm finally ready to put it all out there because honestly, keeping this to myself has been eating me alive. So picture this. I was a 34-year-old male living at home while finishing my architecture degree and working part-time at an auto repair shop. Actually, let me correct that. I was 26 years old back then, not 34. My younger brother Tyler was 24 and had been dating this girl Vanessa for about a year and a half. She was one of those girls who seemed perfect on paper. Pretty, smart, came from a good family. My parents absolutely loved her, always talking about how lucky Tyler was and how she was perfect daughter-in-law material. I never really liked her though. Something about her always felt fake to me. She'd be all sweet and innocent around my parents, but I caught her being pretty nasty to service workers when she thought nobody was looking. Plus, she had this way of making these little comments about me that sounded like jokes, but weren't really jokes, you know? Like she'd say stuff like, "Oh, still living at home? When are you going to get your life together like Tyler?" With this smile that didn't reach her eyes. Tyler was completely whipped by her. This dude would cancel plans with friends, skip family events, and basically reorganize his entire life around whatever Vanessa wanted. It was painful to watch, but he was my brother, and I figured he'd eventually figure it out on his own. The day everything went to hell started normal enough. I was supposed to help Tyler move some furniture from his apartment to his new place. We'd planned to meet there around 2:30 p.m. to get started, but around 1 o'clock he texted me asking if I could head over early because his car was making weird noises and he needed to stop by the shop to get it looked at. He said he might be an hour late, but that Vanessa would be there to let me in, and we could start packing some of the smaller stuff. No big deal, right? I figured I'd grab some energy drinks on the way and maybe get a head start on boxing up his books or whatever. Tyler had given me his spare key months ago when he first moved in, so I didn't think twice about it. I got to his apartment building around 1:15 and took the elevator up to the 3rd floor. The hallway was quiet. Most people were probably at work on a Thursday afternoon. I walked up to Tyler's door and was about to knock when I heard voices inside. I figured Vanessa was maybe on the phone or watching TV. I used my key to unlock the door and stepped inside, calling out, "Hey, it's me," so I wouldn't startle her. That's when I saw them. Vanessa was pressed up against the wall in Tyler's living room with Colin's hands all over her. They were making out like teenagers, completely lost in each other. Colin, my brother's friend since college, the guy who'd been to every birthday party and family barbecue for the past 3 years. "What the hell?" I shouted. They broke apart instantly. Vanessa's face went from passion to pure panic in about half a second. Colin spun around and went white as a sheet when he saw me standing there. For a moment, nobody said anything. The silence was deafening. You could hear the hum of Tyler's refrigerator from the kitchen and the distant sound of traffic outside. I was furious. "Are you kidding me right now?" I said, looking back and forth between them. Here they were, in my brother's own apartment, betraying him in the worst possible way. For a moment, nobody said anything. The shock of being caught had rendered all of us speechless. Then Vanessa started crying. She pushed Colin away and started backing toward the corner of the room, sobbing and saying, "Please don't tell him," over and over again. Her mascara was starting to run, and she looked genuinely terrified of what would happen when Tyler found out. Colin stepped between us with this weird, protective stance, like he was shielding her from me. "Dude, you need to leave," he said firmly. "Just go." Like I was the one who didn't belong there. The audacity of this guy telling me to leave my own brother's apartment after I'd caught him cheating with Tyler's girlfriend was unbelievable. Tyler is my brother. "What the hell do you think you're doing, Colin?" I demanded. I couldn't believe that someone who had been part of our family circle for years would betray Tyler like this. That's when Vanessa really started freaking out. She was hyperventilating, saying things like, "He's going to tell everyone and Tyler will never forgive me." Her breathing was becoming erratic, and she was genuinely panicking about the consequences of her actions being exposed. I tried to calm her down, thinking maybe we could handle this situation rationally, but she just kept getting more hysterical. Colin kept telling me to leave, becoming more insistent and aggressive. Finally, I said screw it and walked out. I figured I'd call Tyler and let him handle it. This wasn't my mess to clean up. I was just the unfortunate messenger who had stumbled into their affair. I drove home thinking about how I was going to break this news to my brother. It was going to destroy him, but he needed to know. The guy deserved better than being played for a fool by someone he trusted, and by his own friend no less. But near the evening, my phone started blowing up with calls from Tyler. When I answered, he was screaming at me in a way I'd never heard before. "What the hell did you do to Vanessa?" he yelled into the phone. The conversation with Tyler was like something out of a nightmare. He was so angry, I could barely understand what he was saying at first. Apparently, Vanessa had called him immediately after I left, crying and telling him that I had attacked her at his place. Her story was that she was alone when I had shown up, and while supposedly helping with the furniture, I had forced myself on her. Colin was backing up her story, claiming he had walked in on us and tried to stop me, but that I was too strong and had threatened both of them. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Tyler, that's completely insane. I caught them making out. She's cheating on you with Colin," I said, trying to get him to listen to reason. "Shut up, you're a liar," he said without hesitation. "Vanessa would never cheat on me. She loves me. You're just jealous because you can't get a girl like her." The jealousy angle hit me hard because it was so ridiculous. I'd never been jealous of Tyler's relationship. If anything, I'd felt bad for him because I could see how manipulative she was being. I tried to explain what I'd actually seen, but Tyler wasn't having any of it. He said Vanessa was talking to the police. The police. I felt like I was in some alternate reality where nothing made sense. "Tyler, please, you have to listen to me. I'm your brother. Why would I lie about this?" I pleaded with him. "Because you've always hated her," he said with conviction. "You've never been able to stand seeing me happy. Well, congratulations. You might have just destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." He hung up on me. I sat there with my hands shaking, trying to figure out what had just happened. 20 minutes ago, I was worried about telling my brother his girlfriend was cheating. Now, apparently, I was a predator. I drove to my parents' house, went inside, and found them in the kitchen. They already knew. Tyler had called them first. They were both sitting there looking at me like I was a stranger, like they'd never seen me before in their lives. My mom was crying, tears streaming down her face, and my dad was just staring at me with this expression I'd never seen before. A mixture of disappointment, disgust, and disbelief. "Is it true?" my dad asked, his voice heavy with judgment. "Is what true? That I caught Vanessa cheating and she's lying about it to cover her tracks?" "Yeah, that's true," I replied, hoping they would listen to reason. My mom gasped like I had just confessed to murder. The sound was sharp and filled with horror, as if my words had physically struck her. "How could you do this to your brother? To that sweet girl?" she asked, her voice breaking. I tried to explain what really happened, going through the entire sequence of events step by step. I told them about going to Tyler's apartment early, using the key he'd given me, calling out when I entered, and finding Vanessa and Colin in a passionate embrace. But they weren't listening any better than Tyler had. They had already decided I was guilty. It was like they were hearing my words but not processing them, not even considering that their son might be telling the truth. They'd rather believe their son was capable of assault than admit their perfect future daughter-in-law was a cheater. The mental gymnastics were incredible to witness. Here I was, their own flesh and blood, telling them what had happened, and they chose to believe the word of someone they'd known for less than 2 years over their own son, who had never lied to them about anything significant in his entire life. The next few hours were surreal. Tyler came home with Vanessa, and she was playing the victim perfectly. She was crying whenever anyone looked at her, flinching when I entered the room, and putting on what I can only describe as an Oscar-worthy performance. She'd clearly studied how trauma victims behave and was executing every expected reaction flawlessly. Her timing was perfect. The tears came at exactly the right moments. Her voice would shake when she spoke about what happened, and she would wrap her arms around herself protectively whenever I was nearby. Tyler wouldn't even look at me when I tried to talk to him. He told me to stay away from his girlfriend, speaking to me like I was some kind of dangerous stranger rather than the brother he'd grown up with. My own brother was treating me like a predator in our own house, the house where we'd both been raised, where we'd shared countless memories and experiences. The worst part was watching my parents comfort Vanessa. My mom was making her tea, bringing her tissues, and telling her how brave she was for coming forward. My dad was patting Tyler on the back and telling him what a good man he was for standing by his woman. Meanwhile, I was sitting right there, their actual son, and they were treating me like a monster who had somehow infiltrated their family. Nobody was asking me for my side of the story. Nobody seemed to care that their son and brother might be innocent. They had already made up their minds based on the word of someone who had just proven herself to be a liar and a cheater. The presumption of innocence, the benefit of the doubt, the basic loyalty you'd expect from family. None of that applied to me anymore. That night, Tyler cornered me in the hallway outside my room. He was different than I'd ever seen him, angry in a way that was almost scary. There was a darkness in his eyes that I'd never witnessed before, a rage that seemed to consume his entire being. "If you ever go near Vanessa again, I will beat the hell out of you myself," he said, his voice low and menacing. The little brother I had taught to throw a football, the kid I'd helped with homework and protected from bullies, was now talking to me like I was his worst enemy. The transformation was complete and terrifying. "Tyler, she's lying. I swear to God she's lying. I caught her cheating and she's covering it up," I said desperately, hoping that somehow I could reach the brother I used to know. He grabbed me by the shirt and slammed me against the wall with surprising force. My little brother was looking at me like he wanted to kill me, his face contorted with rage and disgust. "You're going to keep lying even now?" he said through gritted teeth. "Even after what you did to her? You're sick, man. You're really sick." I pushed him off me, both hurt and angry at his reaction. "Fine, don't believe me. But when you find out the truth, don't come crying to me. The only truth is that my brother is a monster," he said with finality. "And I'm never going to forgive you for this." Those words hit me like a physical blow. In that moment, I realized that the brother I had grown up with, the relationship we'd built over more than 2 decades, was completely dead. He had chosen to believe a lie over his own family, and there was no coming back from that level of betrayal. 2 days later, the police showed up at our house with a warrant for my arrest. I knew it was coming. Vanessa had filed a formal complaint, and Colin was corroborating her story. But actually being handcuffed in front of my neighbors was humiliating beyond words. I could see curtains twitching in windows across the street, people watching as their neighbor was led away in handcuffs. The shame was overwhelming, even though I knew I was innocent. The detective handling my case was this older guy who clearly thought I was guilty from the start. He had that weathered, seen-it-all look that told me he'd been doing this job for decades and had probably heard every excuse in the book. During the interrogation, he kept asking me things like, "Did you plan this, or was it a crime of passion?" Like he was just trying to get me to confess to something I didn't do. His questions weren't designed to find the truth. They were designed to trap me into admitting guilt. He had this tired, cynical attitude that told me he wasn't interested in my version of events. When I told him the truth, that I had caught Vanessa cheating and she was lying to cover it up, he just shook his head and said that's what guys like me always say. Apparently, claiming the victim was lying was such a common defense that it actually made me look more guilty in his eyes. The irony was devastating. Telling the truth was being used as evidence against me. My parents kept asking me if I was sure that's what happened. Like maybe I was confused or afraid to tell the truth. Even they seemed to think I might be lying about my own innocence, which cut deeper than anything else. The only person who believed me was my friend Colin. Wait, that's confusing since there are 2 Collins in this story. Let me clarify. My friend Colin, not the Colin who was cheating with Vanessa. My friend Colin said he'd known Vanessa was sketchy from day one and that my story made perfect sense given what he'd observed about her character. The investigation dragged on for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of my life just suspended in limbo, while the police interviewed witnesses and collected evidence. It felt like being in purgatory. Not guilty, not innocent, just existing in this horrible gray area where my entire future hung in the balance. The house was like a war zone during this time. Tyler and Vanessa were there constantly, and she was milking the victim role for everything it was worth. She'd have panic attacks whenever I was in the room, hyperventilating and crying about how traumatized she was. The performance never stopped, even when she thought no one was watching. I started paying attention to when these episodes occurred, and they always seemed to happen when my parents were around to witness them. When it was just Tyler and her, or when she thought she was alone, she was perfectly fine. Calm, composed, even smug sometimes. Tyler was her loyal guard dog through all of it. He'd sit with her during her episodes, stroking her hair and whispering reassurances, then glare at me like I was some kind of animal that needed to be contained. The way he looked at me had completely changed. There was no recognition of our shared history, no acknowledgement that I was his brother. I had become the enemy in his eyes, someone to be watched and guarded against. My parents were completely buying into the whole act too. They'd comfort Vanessa, telling her how sorry they were that their son had done this to her. They'd bring her food, offer her blankets. treat her like she was recovering from a serious illness. Meanwhile, I felt like a ghost haunting my own house, invisible and unwelcome in the place where I'd grown up. The worst part was that nobody wanted to hear my side of the story. Whenever I tried to explain what really happened, they'd shut me down immediately, saying I was re-traumatizing the victim. It was like being in a Kafka novel. I was guilty until proven innocent, and maybe not even then. The presumption of innocence that's supposed to be fundamental to our justice system didn't seem to apply to me. My college suspended me pending the outcome of the investigation. The administration said they had to take allegations of this nature seriously and couldn't have someone facing these charges on campus. My job fired me for conduct unbecoming, which was their way of saying they didn't want the liability of employing someone accused of sexual assault. Friends stopped calling and returning texts. Word got around our small town pretty quickly, and I couldn't go anywhere without people staring and whispering. My friend Colin was the only one who stuck by me. He'd come over and hang out, which was awkward because Tyler would leave the room whenever Colin showed up. It created this weird dynamic where his presence was a reminder of the divide in our family. Colin kept saying he knew I was innocent and that the truth would come out eventually. Sometimes I wondered if he was just being loyal, or if he actually believed me. But his support was the only thing keeping me sane during those horrible weeks. After about a month, the detective called me in for another interview. His attitude had changed noticeably. He was less aggressive, more inquisitive. He said they had been investigating Colin's story and found some inconsistencies. Apparently, Colin had changed his story twice about what exactly he had seen, and his timeline didn't match up with Vanessa's. When you're lying, it's hard to keep all the details straight, especially under police scrutiny. The detective also told me they had requested Vanessa's phone records and found some interesting text messages. He wouldn't tell me what they said, but his attitude toward me had definitely shifted. Instead of treating me like a confessed criminal, he was asking different questions, like whether I had any proof of the affair I claimed to have discovered. Unfortunately, for my absolutely shitty luck, there were no security cameras around Tyler's place. I had no proof except for what I saw with my own eyes, which apparently wasn't enough to establish my innocence conclusively. 2 weeks later, the charges were dropped. The detective called to tell me that they had found no evidence to support Vanessa's claims, and several pieces of evidence that contradicted her story. He said they wouldn't be pursuing the case further, and there was a note of professional courtesy in his voice that hadn't been there before. The relief I felt was overwhelming, like a crushing weight had been lifted from my chest, but it was mixed with anger that it had taken 6 weeks to reach what should have been an obvious conclusion. You'd think that would be the end of it, but you'd be completely wrong. My parents' reaction to the charges being dropped was basically, well, just because they can't prove it doesn't mean it didn't happen. They said they were disappointed in the justice system for not being able to convict someone they were certain was guilty. It was like they were more invested in being right than in their son being innocent. The cognitive dissonance was staggering. They would rather believe the system had failed than admit they had been wrong about their own child. Tyler was even worse. He said dropping the charges didn't prove anything, that it just meant there wasn't enough evidence for a conviction. The mental gymnastics were incredible to witness. Rather than admit they'd been wrong, they doubled down on their belief that I was guilty. It was like watching people defend a conspiracy theory. No amount of contradictory evidence would change their minds because they had too much invested in their version of reality. But here's the part that made my blood boil. They all stayed loyal to Vanessa. Even after the charges were dropped, even after it was clear her story didn't hold up under scrutiny, my family chose to believe her over me. She was still coming to family dinners, acting like nothing had happened. Tyler was still treating her like his princess, bringing her flowers and planning their future together. My parents were still treating her like their future daughter-in-law, including her in family discussions and holiday planning. Meanwhile, I was the one who was unwelcome in my own house. The irony was devastating. The person who had lied was embraced, while the person who had told the truth was cast out. My parents said I could stay until I figured things out, but it was clear they wanted me gone. The tension in the house was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tyler made it obvious that he couldn't stand being in the same room as me, leaving whenever I entered and refusing to participate in any conversation I was part of. The house that had been my home for 26 years suddenly felt hostile and foreign. Every family photo on the walls seemed to mock me, reminding me of happier times when we were actually a family. The kitchen table where we'd shared thousands of meals together now felt like a battleground. Even my own bedroom felt contaminated by the knowledge that my own parents questioned whether I belonged there. The The final straw came about 2 weeks after the charges were dropped. I overheard my parents talking in the kitchen about how they were concerned about having me around and how they needed to think about Vanessa's comfort. They were literally choosing my brother's lying girlfriend over their own son. The conversation I overheard was brutal and cut me to the core. They were discussing whether to ask me to move out permanently because my presence was upsetting to Vanessa. My mother was saying things like, "She flinches every time he walks into a room," and "We need to think about what's best for Tyler and his relationship." My father was agreeing, saying that maybe it would be better for everyone if I found my own place. They were talking about me like I was a problem to be solved, not their son who had just been vindicated by the legal system. Hearing your own parents discuss how to get rid of you is something that changes you permanently. It's a betrayal so fundamental that it shakes your faith in everything you thought you knew about family, love, and loyalty. These were the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, who were supposed to believe in me when no one else would. Instead, they were treating me like an inconvenience that needed to be managed. That night, I packed everything I owned into my car. It wasn't much: some clothes, a few books, my laptop, and some personal items that had sentimental value. Everything else I left behind, including family photos and mementos from my childhood. I didn't want any reminders of the family that had abandoned me. I left a note saying I was leaving town and not to look for me. I didn't explain where I was going or why. I figured they'd already made it clear that my presence was unwanted. I drove straight to my friend Colin's place and told him I was done. Done with my family, done with that town, done with trying to prove my innocence to people who had already decided I was guilty. The decision felt both liberating and terrifying. I was cutting ties with everything I'd ever known, but I was also freeing myself from a toxic situation that was destroying my mental health. Colin tried to talk me out of it, saying I should stay and fight, that eventually they'd come around and realize they'd been wrong. But I was finished fighting. Sometimes you have to know when to walk away, even when walking away means losing everything you thought mattered. I had reached my breaking point, and staying would have meant accepting a role as the family pariah for the rest of my life. I knew that even if I fought back, the damage was already done, and I had no evidence to definitively prove what I'd seen. It would always be my word against theirs, and they had already shown which side they'd chosen. I knew I had no place with my family anymore. They had made that abundantly clear through their actions and their overheard conversations. I headed north with no real plan except to get as far away as possible. I ended up in Vancouver because it was the first major city I hit after crossing the border. And honestly, the distance felt right. I figured if I was going to disappear, I might as well do it properly. The French signs and different money made it feel like a completely different world, which was exactly what I needed. Even something as simple as seeing kilometers instead of miles on road signs reinforced that I was truly starting over in a place where nobody knew my story. The first few months were rough as hell. I was living in this tiny studio apartment in a sketchy part of town, the kind of place where you could hear your neighbors arguing through paper-thin walls, and the hallways always smelled like a mixture of old cooking and cigarettes. I was working construction jobs that paid cash under the table, which was perfect for someone trying to disappear completely. My French was garbage, so I mostly worked with other English speakers who were just as desperate for work as I was. Immigrants, people running from their own problems, guys who didn't ask questions about your past. The construction crew became like a temporary family in a weird way. These were guys who didn't ask questions about why you ended up in Canada or what you were running from. They judged you only on whether you could swing a hammer accurately and show up on time every morning. There was something refreshing about that level of simplicity after months of having every aspect of my character questioned and dissected by people who claimed to love me. The hardest part was the complete isolation. For the first time in my life, I didn't have anyone. No family, no childhood friends, no connections at all. Just me in a foreign country trying to figure out how to rebuild my entire existence from scratch. Some nights I'd sit in that tiny apartment eating instant noodles, and I'd wonder if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. The silence was deafening after growing up in a house full of people, and there were moments when the loneliness felt like it might actually kill me. The work was brutal but therapeutic in its own way. There's something about building things with your hands that helps clear your head when everything else is falling apart. The physical exhaustion was welcome. It meant I could sleep without lying awake replaying everything that had happened. I specialized in framing and drywall work that required focus and precision, and the satisfaction of seeing a building come together piece by piece gave me something to be proud of when everything else felt hopeless. I changed my name legally after about 6 months. It cost me almost everything I had saved, but I needed to shed that old identity completely. Every time I saw my old name on documents, it reminded me of everything that had happened. The accusations, the betrayal, the family that had thrown me away. The new name felt like putting on clean clothes after being covered in mud. It was symbolic of the fresh start I was trying to create. Even though the process of legally changing your identity is surprisingly complex and emotionally draining. My friend Colin stayed in touch, which probably saved my sanity during those early months. He'd call every couple of weeks to check in, and eventually started visiting me a few times a year. It was good to have one person from my old life who still believed in me, who remembered who I was before everything went to hell. He'd update me on what was happening back home, though most of it I didn't want to hear. Hearing about my family's life continuing without me was like picking at a scab that wouldn't heal. Apparently, Tyler and Vanessa got more serious after I left. He proposed to her with some elaborate setup in the park where they'd had their first date, complete with photographers and a crowd of their friends watching. My parents were thrilled about the engagement, constantly talking about wedding plans and the prospect of future grandchildren. Tyler had gotten a promotion at his job, and they'd settled into domestic life together, playing house like nothing had ever happened. From the outside, it looked like the perfect happy ending. The loving couple overcoming adversity and building a life together. Except for the son and brother they'd thrown away to make it happen. Colin never said it directly, but I could tell he thought my family was seriously messed up for choosing Vanessa over me. He'd make subtle comments about how weird it was that they never asked about me or seemed concerned about where I'd gone. But he was loyal to me, not them. So he kept those observations mostly to himself. He did mention that some of our mutual friends had started asking questions about my sudden disappearance. People who had known me for years were confused about why I'd just vanished without explanation. But Tyler and my parents had just said I'd moved away for work opportunities, keeping the real story buried. It was easier for them to maintain the fiction that I'd simply relocated for career reasons than to explain the truth about what had torn our family apart. After about a year, I started getting my life together for real. I enrolled in a college program to finish my architecture degree, using my new identity and Canadian residency status. The transition back to academic life was jarring after months of physical labor, but it felt good to be using my brain again and working towards something meaningful. The classrooms and lecture halls felt like foreign territory after spending so much time on construction sites, but I was determined to complete the education I'd started before everything fell apart. I made a few friends in college. Nothing deep initially, but people to grab a drink with or watch hockey games. It was a relief to have casual social interactions that weren't weighed down by my past. These were people who knew me only as the guy I was trying to become, not the person I'd been forced to leave behind. The work situation improved too when I landed a job with a construction company that specialized in commercial buildings. The pay was decent, and the work was satisfying in a way that gave me a sense of purpose and accomplishment. I started dating again around year 2, though trust was still a major issue for me. The experience with Vanessa's lies had left me deeply suspicious of people's motives, and I found myself constantly analyzing whether someone was being genuine or putting on an act. Every smile, every laugh, every expression of affection was scrutinized for signs of deception. It was exhausting to live that way, but I couldn't seem to turn off that hypervigilant state of mind. But slowly, gradually, I learned to open up again. I started having a routine that felt normal: work, school, a decent apartment in a better neighborhood, and a job I didn't hate. Having structure and stability helped restore my confidence in myself and my ability to judge situations accurately. The small victories added up: passing exams, completing projects at work, having conversations with classmates that didn't revolve around my past trauma. The real breakthrough came in year 3 when I met Sophia at a coffee shop near campus. She was a nursing student, originally from Toronto, and we hit it off immediately. There was something about her that felt different from the start. She was direct and honest in a way that reminded me there were still genuine people in the world. She had this laugh that was completely unguarded. And when she talked about her studies or her family, there was no pretense or performance. She was just authentically herself. Sophia was incredibly patient with my trust issues and never pushed when I was obviously uncomfortable with something. We took things incredibly slow, slower than either of us probably wanted, but she seemed to understand that I needed time to feel safe. She didn't press for information about my past when I clearly wasn't ready to share it, which made me trust her even more. Most people would have gotten frustrated with my guardedness, But she just accepted that I had reasons for being cautious. By the time I was ready to tell her the whole story, we'd been together for almost a year, and she already knew me well enough to know I wasn't capable of what I'd been accused of. The night I finally opened up to her about everything that had happened, we were sitting in her apartment after dinner, and I just started talking. I told her about catching Vanessa cheating, about the false accusations, about my family choosing to believe lies over their own son, about having to leave everything behind and start over. Sophia listened to the entire story without interrupting, and when I was finished, her first reaction was, "That's completely insane that your family believed her over you." Having someone validate that the situation was crazy, that I wasn't overreacting or being dramatic, was huge for my mental health. She didn't question my version of events or suggest that maybe there was more to the story. She just accepted that I was telling the truth and that what had happened to me was fundamentally wrong. We got serious pretty quickly once I opened up to her completely. She was the first person besides Colin who had heard the whole story and immediately understood how devastating it had been. She helped me remember who I was before everything got destroyed, encouraging me to talk about my dreams and plans for the future instead of just dwelling on the past. Her perspective on relationships and family was completely different from what I'd experienced. When Sophia brought me home to meet her family in Toronto, they welcomed me like I'd always been part of their family. Her father taught me to fish on the Don River, showing me techniques he'd learned from his own father decades earlier. Her mother shared family recipes that had been passed down for generations, writing them out on index cards for me to take home. Nobody questioned my past or made me feel like I had to prove myself worthy of their daughter's love. They just accepted that I was important to Sophia, and that was enough for them. Sophia's parents had been married for 30 years and still acted like they genuinely enjoyed each other's company. They would laugh together at inside jokes, hold hands while watching TV, and support each other through disagreements without it turning into warfare. Watching them interact showed me what a healthy relationship actually looked like, something I'd never really witnessed before. Her family background was completely different from mine. She'd grown up in a stable household where parents actually communicated with their kids and worked through problems instead of choosing sides and creating permanent divisions. When she talked about her childhood, it sounded like stories from a different planet. Her parents had taught her that family members stick together through difficulties, that you give people the benefit of the doubt, and that love means believing in someone even when things get complicated. These concepts were foreign to me after what I'd experienced, but being around her family helped me understand what I'd been missing. After about 2 years together, Sophia got pregnant. Twins, which was both terrifying and amazing at the same time. We were having a boy and a girl, and I remember thinking that these kids would never know the pain of being abandoned by their family. They would grow up in a house where their father would always believe them, always support them, and always be on their side no matter what happened. When the kids were born, everything clicked into place in a way I hadn't expected. Holding my son and daughter for the first time, I knew I would literally die before letting anyone hurt them the way I had been hurt. These children were going to grow up knowing their father's love was unconditional, that they could come to me with any problem and know they'd be heard and supported. The fierce protectiveness I felt was almost overwhelming. It was like someone had flipped a switch in my brain that made their well-being the most important thing in the universe. The kids are 4 now, and they're everything to me. Watching them discover the world, seeing their personalities develop, being there for all their milestones, it's given my life a purpose and meaning that I never could have imagined. They don't know anything about the family I left behind or the trauma that brought me to Canada. To them, I'm just dad, the guy who makes pancakes on Saturday mornings, fixes their broken toys, and reads them bedtime stories every night. Sophia's family stepped up in ways that blew my mind and showed me what real family support looks like. Her parents moved to Vancouver to be closer to the grandkids, taking early retirement so they could help us with childcare. It was a huge sacrifice on their part, leaving their established life in Toronto, their friends, their familiar routines, all so they could be present for their grandchildren's daily lives. Her father helped me buy a house in a good neighborhood with decent schools, co-signing the mortgage when my credit history wasn't quite strong enough on its own. Having someone believe in me enough to put their financial reputation on the line was incredibly meaningful. Her mother basically moved in for the first month after the twins were born, doing laundry, cooking meals, and teaching Sophia and me how to handle 2 babies at once. She'd get up for the middle of the night feedings, change diapers without complaint, and somehow manage to keep the house functioning while we figured out how to be parents. The level of selfless support was something I'd never experienced before, and it showed me what grandparents are supposed to be like. I got promoted to project manager at the construction company, which came with better pay and more flexible hours. The promotion meant I could spend more time with the kids while still advancing my career, which was exactly what I wanted. Being able to attend their daycare events, pick them up when they were sick, and be present for the important moments felt like a luxury after growing up in a family where work always seemed to come first. Sophia finished her nursing degree and got a job at the Children's Hospital, which was perfect because she could relate to what the families were going through. She had this natural ability to comfort parents who were terrified about their children's health, probably because she understood what it meant to love someone that much. Her empathy and clinical skills made her incredibly good at her job, and I was proud to watch her build a career she was passionate about. We were actually living a dream life. Good jobs, nice house, healthy kids, supportive extended family. Everything I'd thought was impossible after my world fell apart. The kids grew up thinking they had one set of grandparents, and that was completely normal to them. They had no reason to question why they only knew one side of their family tree, and we didn't volunteer information about the relatives they'd never meet. I told Sophia's parents the truth about my family situation, and they made it clear that as far as they were concerned, I was their son now. They took their grandparent duties seriously, showing up for every birthday party, school play, and soccer game. They spoiled the kids rotten just like any other grandchildren, taking them on special outings, teaching them skills, and creating the kind of memories that last a lifetime. My kids called them Grandma and Grandpa with complete naturalness, having no idea that family relationships could be complicated or conditional. Colin kept visiting, usually twice a year, and became like an uncle to the kids. They loved him, and he loved being able to spoil them and then give them back to us when they got cranky. He'd bring them presents from back home, play endless games of hide and seek, and tell them stories that made them laugh until their sides hurt. Having him in their lives provided a connection to my past that felt positive and safe. He'd still update me on what was happening back home, though by now I mostly didn't want to know the details. Tyler and Vanessa had gotten married in this big, expensive wedding that my parents had apparently paid for. From Colin's description, it sounded like the kind of elaborate affair that gets featured in wedding magazines. Hundreds of guests, professional photographers, a reception that went until the early hours of the morning. They'd bought a house 3 streets over from where we grew up, close enough to my parents that Vanessa could continue her perfect daughter-in-law act on a daily basis. Tyler was working at the same engineering firm where my dad had worked before retiring. It was like they were living the life I was supposed to have had. The stable job, the house in the hometown, the close relationship with the parents, the woman who had destroyed my chance at having any of it. Colin said my parents still never mentioned me or asked how I was doing, as if I had never existed. They'd created this alternate reality where their family consisted of Tyler, Vanessa, and themselves, and I was just erased from the family history completely. Honestly, by that point it didn't hurt as much as it used to. I had a family that actually cared about me. Kids who thought I was a hero for being able to fix their broken toys and make pancakes on Saturday mornings, and a life built on truth instead of lies. The contrast between my old family and my new one made it clear that I'd actually gained more than I'd lost, even though the path to get here had been devastating. 8 years after everything fell apart, and 5 years into this peaceful family life with Sophia and the twins, the universe decided to test me again. It was a Saturday morning, and I was helping my son with his math homework while my daughter and Sophia were at the grocery store. Just a normal weekend morning. The kind of quiet domestic scene that had become the foundation of my happiness. The doorbell rang, and I figured it was probably a neighbor or a delivery driver. My son ran to answer it before I could stop him, which was typical for a curious 4-year-old. I heard him talking to someone but couldn't make out what was being said from where I was sitting. Then he came running back looking confused and a little uncertain. "Dad, there's an old man at the door who says he's your father," he said. My stomach dropped like I'd just stepped off a cliff. I walked to the front door, and there was my father standing on my porch in Canada, looking older and more tired than I remembered, but definitely him. He was wearing a winter coat that looked expensive, but hung loose on his frame, like he'd lost weight recently. His hair had gone completely gray, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there when I'd last seen him. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. This man who had disowned me 8 years ago was somehow standing at my door, like something out of a nightmare. The sight of him brought back all the old feelings of betrayal and anger that I thought I'd processed and moved past. "Hello, son," he said quietly. His voice was the same, but there was something broken in it, a weariness that hadn't been there before. I slammed that door so hard the whole frame shook. All those old feelings of betrayal and anger came flooding back like it had happened yesterday instead of 8 years ago. My hands were shaking, and I could hear my heart pounding in my ears like a drum. The sight of him had triggered an immediate fight-or-flight response that I couldn't control. My dad kept knocking and calling my name. My old name, which sounded foreign and uncomfortable after all these years of being someone else. "Please, son, open that door and let me talk to you. I know you're angry, but please let me explain," he said through the door. The desperation in his voice was something I'd never heard before, but I wasn't ready to deal with whatever this was. Then Sophia got home with our daughter, and she was asking who was that man at the door. I explained the situation as simply as I could, that it was my father, the one who had chosen to believe lies over his own son 8 years ago. Sophia had heard the whole story, obviously, but she'd never expected to actually meet any of my biological family. She was furious on my behalf, but she told me to take my time and see what he wanted while she'd keep the kids busy and give me space to deal with whatever this confrontation was going to bring. She took the kids to their rooms and put on a movie, giving me the privacy I needed to handle this unexpected intrusion into our peaceful life. I took a few deep breaths, trying to center myself and prepare for whatever conversation was about to happen. Then I opened the door and let my father in, immediately regretting the decision, but knowing I needed to find out why he was here. He looked around the house, taking in the family photos on the walls, the kids' artwork stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, and all the obvious signs of a happy family life. There were pictures of birthday parties, family vacations, school events, and holidays. Years of memories that he'd never been part of and never would be. His eyes lingered on photos of his grandchildren that he'd never meet, and I could see the weight of his choices settling on his shoulders. "You've done well for yourself," he said, and there was genuine admiration in his voice, mixed with what sounded like regret. "No thanks to you," I replied coldly. "What do you want?" He sat down heavily on my couch and suddenly looked every one of his 75 years. The confidence and authority that had always defined him seemed to have evaporated, leaving behind a tired old man who looked like he was carrying the weight of the world. "I need to tell you something we discovered last month," he said. What my father told me next was both vindicating and infuriating at the same time. Apparently, Tyler and Vanessa's marriage wasn't the fairy tale everyone thought it was. About 6 months ago, Tyler had started noticing some weird behavior from Vanessa. She was being secretive with her phone, making excuses to go out alone, and staying late at work for projects that never seemed to materialize into anything concrete. Tyler had decided to do some detective work before confronting her directly. He followed Vanessa one evening when she said she was going to her book club, only to see her car parked outside a restaurant downtown. He waited in his car for 3 hours until she came out, with Colin. But instead of confronting them immediately, he made the smart decision to start paying attention to everything and documenting what he observed. Her schedule, her excuses, her behavior when she thought he wasn't watching. Tyler started building a case like a private investigator. He followed them for weeks, getting photos and video evidence of their relationship. It turned out she was still having an affair with Colin, who was now married with kids of his own. They'd been meeting at hotels, at Colin's office after hours, anywhere they could be alone together. The affair had never really ended. They'd just gotten better at hiding it over the years. Here's the part that made my blood boil. They'd been carrying on this affair for years, not months. Years. It had been going on since before I caught them the first time, and had continued through Vanessa's entire marriage to Tyler. Tyler found credit card records showing regular hotel visits throughout their marriage, plus evidence that they'd been meeting even before the wedding. He'd also discovered text messages between them, and what was in those messages was devastating. They'd been planning their future together, talking about leaving their respective spouses, and even discussing what they'd do if anyone found out about their history. The kicker was that during their marriage, Colin had gotten Vanessa pregnant, and she'd had an abortion without telling Tyler, terrified it might not be his child. The messages showed them laughing about how clueless Tyler was and how easy it had been to fool everyone. In those messages, Vanessa was also paranoid about the family finding out the truth about everything they had done. She was terrified that I would somehow prove my innocence and expose their lies. They'd even discussed what they'd do if I ever came back and tried to tell people what really happened. When Tyler finally confronted her with all the evidence, the photos, the credit card records, the text messages, She broke down completely and confessed everything. She admitted that she and Colin had been involved before Tyler, that they'd never really stopped seeing each other, and that when I caught them that day years ago, she had panicked and made up the assault story to cover her tracks. She'd married Tyler while still in love with Colin. She'd let my family destroy me to protect her secret. And she'd been planning to leave Tyler for Colin as soon as Colin's divorce was finalized, and they could be together openly without the complications of their current marriages. My father had discovered all this when Tyler came to him for advice about getting divorced. Tyler was completely destroyed, asking how he could have been so blind, how he could have wasted years of his life on someone who never loved him, and how he had destroyed his relationship with his brother for a woman who had been lying about everything from the beginning. Tyler is beside himself, my father said, his voice heavy with guilt and regret. He knows he destroyed his relationship with his brother for a cheater. He wants to call you to apologize, but he doesn't even know how to find you. He's been asking everyone if they know where you went, but you just disappeared completely. I sat there trying to process all this information. 8 years too late, my family finally knew the truth. 8 years after they'd thrown me away like garbage, they'd finally figured out that I'd been telling the truth all along. The vindication felt hollow after so much time had passed, like winning an argument with someone who was no longer in the room. "And what about you?" I asked my father, my voice cutting through the heavy silence in the room. "What's your excuse for believing her over your own son?" He looked down at his hands, and I could see tears forming in his eyes, something I'd rarely witnessed in my entire life. My father had always been this stoic, unshakable figure, and seeing him break down was both satisfying and disturbing at the same time. "I don't have one," he admitted quietly. "We were wrong. Completely, utterly wrong. We let that girl manipulate us into destroying our own family, and we've spent years living with the consequences of that choice." "Have you, though?" I asked, my anger building as I thought about all the updates Colin had given me over the years. "Because from what Colin tells me, you all seemed pretty happy with your choice. You got your perfect daughter-in-law, your fairy tale wedding, your happy family. You just erased me from the picture and moved on like I never existed." "We tried to," he admitted, and the honesty in his voice was almost more painful than if he'd lied. "But not a day went by that I didn't think about you, wonder where you were, if you were okay, if you'd ever forgive us. Your mother, she's never been the same. She's been on antidepressants for years, crying every Christmas and birthday because her son isn't there. She keeps your old room exactly the same, like she's waiting for you to come home. Her son was there," I said firmly. "You just chose to believe I was a predator instead of listening to me." We talked for about 2 hours, and the conversation was emotionally exhausting for both of us. He told me about how Tyler's world had fallen apart when he learned the truth, how my mother had been devastated to discover what they'd done to an innocent son, and how they'd all been trying to figure out how to find me and make amends. He said they'd hired a private investigator who eventually tracked me down in Vancouver, which explained how he'd found my address. I told him about my life, my wife, my kids, my career, my in-laws who treated me like family. I showed him pictures of his grandchildren that he'd never meet, told him about the family traditions we'd created, the life I'd built from nothing after being thrown away by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. I explained how Sophia's parents had stepped into the grandparent role naturally and completely, and how my kids had never known they were missing anything. "I want to make this right," he said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I know I can't undo what we did, but maybe we can find a way forward. Maybe we can be a family again." "There is no way forward," I told him firmly. "You made your choice 8 years ago. You chose to believe a liar over your own son. You threw me away like I was nothing, and now you want me to just forgive and forget because you finally figured out the truth?" I told him about the years of therapy I'd needed, the trust issues that still affected my relationships, the complete destruction of my faith and family loyalty. I explained how I'd built a new life with people who actually cared about me, and how his sudden appearance had disrupted the peace I'd worked so hard to achieve. I talked about the nightmares I'd had for years, wondering if I really was the monster they thought I was, questioning my own memory and sanity. "I'm sorry," he said, and he was crying now, full tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry for everything. We were terrible parents, and you deserved so much better than what we gave you." "Your apology is too late," I said, feeling a strange sense of calm settling over me. "I have a family now that chooses me every day, that believes in me, that would never throw me away for someone else's lies. You can take your guilt and your apologies, and go back to whatever's left of the family you chose to protect. I walked him to the door and told him not to contact me again. He handed me a piece of paper with Tyler's phone number on it, saying Tyler wanted to apologize too and had been hoping to reconnect. I threw it in the trash without looking at it, making sure he saw me do it. The gesture was deliberate and final. I wanted him to understand that this door was closed permanently. After he left, I sat on my couch and cried for the first time in years. But I wasn't crying because I was sad. I was crying because I was finally completely free. The truth was out. My family knew they'd been wrong, and I discovered that I didn't care anymore. Their validation meant nothing to me now. I had everything I needed right here in this house, with my wife and kids and the family that chose to love me. Sophia came downstairs after putting the kids to bed and found me sitting there, emotionally drained but oddly peaceful. "Are you okay? How do you feel?" she asked, sitting next to me and taking my hand in hers. The simple gesture of comfort and support reminded me why I'd fallen in love with her in the first place. "Like I can finally close that chapter," I said. "They know the truth now, and it doesn't change anything. This is my family. You guys are my family, and that's enough." Colin called later that night to check on me. Apparently, my father had contacted him to get my address, and Colin had been debating whether to warn me or not. He'd ultimately decided to let me handle it however I saw fit, which I appreciated. I told him what my father had said, and Colin just laughed. "Took them long enough to figure it out," he said. "Too bad they lost you in the process." "Their loss," I said. And for the first time in 8 years, I really meant it. The words didn't feel bitter or defensive. They felt like simple truth. The conversation with my father had been the closure I didn't know I needed. For years, I'd carried this small part of me that wondered if maybe I'd been wrong, if maybe I'd misunderstood what I'd seen, if maybe I'd been too hasty in leaving. But hearing him admit that they'd been completely wrong, that Vanessa had been lying all along, that I'd been telling the truth from the beginning, it validated everything I'd felt and experienced. More importantly, it made me realize how much I'd gained by losing them. My life in Canada, my relationship with Sophia, my children, my career. None of it would have been possible if I'd stayed and tried to rebuild relationships with people who fundamentally didn't trust me. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Edit. A lot of people are asking if I'm going to reconnect with Tyler. The answer is no. He had 8 years to figure out the truth, or at least question Vanessa's story. Instead, he married her and lived happily ever after, while I rebuilt my life from nothing. Some bridges burned completely, and that's okay. Tyler had countless opportunities over those 8 years to examine the situation more critically. He could have questioned why Vanessa's story had inconsistencies from the beginning. He could have wondered why Colin's account kept changing. He could have asked himself why his own brother, someone he'd known his entire life, would suddenly become a monster. But he didn't do any of those things. Instead, he chose the easy path of believing what he wanted to believe. Even now, his desire to reconcile feels selfish to me. He's not reaching out because he's genuinely sorry or because he's realized the depth of what he did to his brother. He's reaching out because his perfect life fell apart, and now he wants to feel better about himself by making amends. But some actions have consequences that can't be undone with an apology, no matter how sincere it might be. The fact is, Tyler made his choice when it mattered. When I needed my brother to believe in me, to stand by me, to at least consider that I might be telling the truth, he chose to believe a woman he'd known for less than 2 years over the brother he'd grown up with. That choice revealed something fundamental about his character and his priorities that an apology can't erase. Edit 2. For those asking about my kids, they know I'm from the States and that I have family there I don't talk to. When they're older, I'll tell them the whole story. But right now, they're just happy kids with parents who love them and grandparents who spoil them rotten. That's how I want to keep it. My children are growing up in an environment of unconditional love and support. They've never experienced the kind of betrayal that shaped my adult life, and they never will if I have anything to say about it. Sophia's parents treat them exactly like biological grandchildren, taking them on special trips, teaching them family traditions, showing up for every school event and milestone. The kids have no sense that they're missing anything because they're not missing anything. When they're old enough to understand complex adult relationships and the ways families can fail each other, I'll explain why they only have one set of grandparents. I'll tell them about the importance of loyalty, about believing in the people you love, and about the consequences of choosing lies over truth. But for now, They're just innocent children who deserve to feel secure and loved without the burden of adult complications. The beautiful thing about my life now is how normal and stable it feels. Saturday morning pancakes, helping with homework, family movie nights, bedtime stories. These simple moments are everything I never knew I was missing. My kids will grow up knowing that their father will always be on their side, that they can come to me with any problem, and that my love for them is completely unconditional. Looking back on everything that happened, I can honestly say I'm grateful for how it all worked out. Not for the pain, not for the betrayal, not for the years of rebuilding, but for where it led me. If my family had believed me 8 years ago, if they'd chosen truth over lies, I probably would have stayed in that small town, married someone local, and lived a perfectly ordinary life. I never would have met Sophia, never would have had my amazing kids, never would have discovered my own strength and resilience. The experience taught me that family isn't just about blood relations. It's about the people who choose to stand by you when things get difficult. Sophia's parents didn't have to welcome me into their family, but they did. Colin didn't have to maintain our friendship through years of separation, but he did. Sophia didn't have to be patient with my trust issues and emotional baggage, but she was. Those are the relationships that matter. Those are the people who showed me what real love and loyalty look like. My biological family's betrayal was devastating at the time, but it ultimately led me to people who love me better and more authentically than my original family ever did. The truth coming out after all these years doesn't change anything for me practically, but it does provide a sense of closure I didn't realize I needed. For 8 years, there was this tiny part of me that wondered if maybe I'd misremembered what I saw, if maybe there was some explanation I'd missed. Having my father confirm that Vanessa had been lying all along validates everything I experienced and felt during those horrible months. But more than that, it confirms that I made the right choice in walking away. A family that would choose to believe lies over their own son, that would rather protect a manipulative outsider than defend their own blood, that would continue to exclude the truth teller even after being proven wrong. That's not a family worth having. I've built something better. I have a wife who trusts me completely, children who adore me, in-laws who treat me like their own son, and a life filled with genuine love and support. The family I was born into threw me away, but the family I chose has given me everything I ever wanted. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Losing my original family was devastating, but it forced me to become someone stronger, more independent, and ultimately happier than I ever could have been if I'd stayed in that toxic situation. The man who walked into Tyler's apartment 8 years ago and caught his girlfriend cheating was naive about family loyalty and the depths of human selfishness. The man writing this today knows exactly who he is, what he's worth, and what kind of love he deserves. That transformation was painful, but it was also necessary. My advice to anyone going through something similar is this: don't waste years trying to convince people who have already decided not to believe you. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to walk away and build something better elsewhere. You deserve people in your life who choose you, who believe in you, and who would never throw you away for someone else's convenience. The truth always comes out eventually, but by the time it does, you might discover that you don't need it anymore.